Welcome to Whisky Cast, cask strength conversation featuring news and interviews from the world of whiskey. I'm Mark Gillespie. This is episode number 808 for March 1st, 2020. Coming up in a few minutes.
We like to camp together, and we were quite drunk in a camp, looking at a barley field, swaying, drinking whiskey, and just like, why can't we make whiskey out of Icelandic barley? It was a good idea when you are have nothing left in a bottle, but then we needed to figure out why and how we could do it.
Eva Maria Silverberg's daughter and her family run Iceland's only whiskey distillery. Einverk Distillery is located just south of Reykjavik and makes the Floki line of single malt whiskeys, including a smoked whiskey that's not made with peat. Yep, it's smoked with sheep dung. We'll get the story behind it from Eva Maria, and I'll have my tasting notes for it in the What I'm Tasting This Week department. We'll also have Behind the Label, Your Voice, and this month's Whiskey Club of the Month winner. It's all just ahead on this edition of Whiskey Cast.
From far beyond the wall comes a whiskey for those who face the oncoming storm and never stop walking. Winter is here. White Walker by Johnny Walker.
White Walker by Johnny Walker. Blended Scotch whiskey, 41.7% alcohol by volume. Imported by Diageo North America, Norwalk, Connecticut. Please drink responsibly.
When you land on something special, you just know. Redbreast, the quintessential single pot still Irish whiskey, and a proud sponsor of Whiskey Cast.
Let's get started with the news. It's brought to you by Heaven Hill Distillery. As the coronavirus outbreak spreads from Asia to other parts of the world, it is starting to have a greater impact on the whiskey business. Diageo executives announced this week that they expect this fiscal year's operating profits to be significantly lower than previous expectations. How much? As much as £200 million. That's based on many bars and restaurants in China being closed because of the outbreak, and many large conferences and other events have either been canceled or postponed. That includes the Chinese Grand Prix Formula One race in Shanghai that was scheduled for April 19th. That's also the same weekend as the Whiskey Lux Festival in Chengdu, China. We just got word this weekend that it is being postponed as well. The organizers have not made a decision on when it will be rescheduled. Now, the impact could become even larger as the outbreak spreads to many parts of Europe, including Italy, Spain, and Switzerland, where the government has now banned all large-scale events with more than 1,000 attendees until at least March 15th. Pernod Ricard CEO Alexander Ricard said this week that it'll be at least another month or so before he's able to gauge the impact on his company's profits. That's when numbers for the last 3 months will be available, including the Chinese New Year period when spirits sales are traditionally strong in Asia. Both Diageo and Pernod Ricard have cut back on corporate travel as a result of the outbreak. The outbreak has also led to an increase in online whiskey shopping in Asia. Decanta.com founder Mikio Masa told me this week that she's not trying to capitalize on the outbreak, but acknowledges that sales are up in recent weeks.
People, especially from Hong Kong or Singapore, they really narrowly socialize now. So when they stay home, what do they do? It's all the whiskeys. Yeah. So it's been really good impact for us.
So far, authorities have not imposed any restrictions on home deliveries. Meanwhile, Ian Chang has announced his plans to step down as master distiller and blender for the King Car Distillery in Taiwan and its award-winning Cavalan single malts. He and the late Dr. Jim Swan opened the distillery together in 2005 for the Lee family, which owns King Car Group. In an email this week, Ian told me he does not have anything lined up right now, but says with the coronavirus outbreak, he thinks it's a perfect time to stop for a while to recharge before he starts a new job. Meanwhile, Pernod Ricard's Chivas Brothers unit has big plans in store for Glentalker's distillery in Speyside as part of the company's Scotland-wide sustainability project. The distillery will be converted to use renewable biofuels to power its boilers. In an email to WhiskyCast, a company spokesperson said the goal is to reduce the distillery's carbon emissions by 90% over the next 18 months and become carbon neutral within 2 years. Chivas Brothers also plans to cut carbon and greenhouse gas emissions by 20% company-wide and switch to 100% sustainably sourced packaging over the same period. There's another new distillery being built in Kentucky. That's not really news, except for who's building it. The University of Kentucky's Beam Institute for Kentucky Spirits will break ground in the next several weeks on a microdistillery right in the heart of UK's Lexington campus. It'll be used as a teaching laboratory for students. The project got a shot in the arm Thursday during the Institute's first industry conference in Lexington. Independent stave company CEO Brad Boswell announced that his family will donate $1 million to the university to fund the construction of a 600-barrel rickhouse next to the Institute.
It'll be a barrel house that's going to be a real barrel house. It's going to be about a 600-barrel house for experimentation. It'll also be for training young distillers of the future and distillery workers of the future how to practically handle barrels, and they'll come to work prepared, know what barrels are and how to handle and maintain them. It'll also a lot of experimentation. Really, we're excited about using this new warehouse. It's going to be the independent stave company, Boswell family barrel warehouse, and we're excited to use that for experimentation. So with my friends up here, hopefully we'll have lots of good liquids going into barrels, different types of barrels for different amounts of time, and then see how they perform. And hopefully we all have a common goal of making better and better bourbons and whiskeys that the public enjoys responsibly. So hopefully this project and this donation and this institute will help facilitate that and make it a reality.
Last year, Beam Suntory donated $5 million to endow the Institute, which is not only educating future distillers, but doing valuable research. Professor Seth DeBolt is the Institute's director. He told me the new distillery and rickhouse will be finished in about 18 months from now.
It's just a gift for the Kentucky students, and I'm so honored that the Boswell family felt comfortable with us to build that facility and make this the world-class facility that it can be.
And that's what you need to make the distillery that you're building on campus work too, right?
That's right. That is the final piece where they can engage in not only the distilling, the grains piece, and all the operations, but then take that into the maturation piece. That's an amazing opportunity. Even though the aging period may extend beyond when they're actually in the classroom, that will be something they can come back, visit, think about, learn from, and we can do long-term experiments with a lot of that student activity.
And that's the project. The plan is to do experiments with this stuff and not just stick whiskey away.
No, there is a huge workforce piece, but the experimental needs of our partners are such that a 600-barrel warehouse is an ideal investment to experiment and learn for short, medium, and long-term experiments to guide the future of maturation.
Around 500 people from all over the whiskey industry attended Thursday's conference. We'll have more highlights later and on upcoming episodes of WhiskyCast. Last September, we reported on the Kentucky Bourbon Festival's search for a new leader. This week, the festival's board announced that veteran festival and special events manager Randy Prosser has been named the Bourbon Festival's new president and chief operating officer. Prosser directed operations for the last 4 Kentucky Derbies at Churchill Downs and has more than 25 years of event management experience.
There are other places that have bourbon and certainly other festivals around the country and the world that celebrate bourbon, but there's only one Bardstown, Kentucky, and that was a unique opportunity here to really not only take that brand to the next level, but really take the event and the celebration of everything bourbon and really define it and celebrate it.
Now, the Bourbon Festival has gone through a shakeup in the last year or so. What are you looking to do to put your stamp on it?
Well, it's a marathon, not a sprint. The event's been around for 28 years, going into its 29th year right now. I'm certainly looking ahead at the 30th year because that's what you do in the festival and operations world. This year's festival is tomorrow for all practical purposes. So What we're looking at doing is just getting the stability back, making sure the community and all the distillery partners know that it's here, it's strong, it's going to continue to be in place. And while I'm doing that, I'm letting people know that there's a lot of excitement on our end as far as what the future holds. So I guess the short answer would be just to make sure the stability is there and the communication, the network with the distilleries is there. The community, I've already been out working with them, so they know it's here and it's in good hands. So before we start looking too far out in the future, we just want to make sure the foundation itself is solid.
Prosser says the most obvious changes this year will come on the marketing side, while bigger changes will likely wait until next year. That's when the festival will celebrate its 30th anniversary. This year's Kentucky Bourbon Festival is set for September 16th through the 20th. In other news, Blanton's bourbon lovers in the U.S. can rejoice. No, Buffalo Trace is not going to make Blanton's any easier to find, but for the first time, one of the export-only versions of Blanton's will finally be available in the U.S. Blanton's Gold will become an annual U.S. release starting this summer. It's bottled at 51.5% ABV, compared to the 46.5% original single-barrel Blanton's. That's not the only difference, as Buffalo Trace master distiller Harlan Wheatley told me.
The main difference on all those Blanton's are proof and age. So anything export only is usually 8 years old versus 6 in the U.S.
Blanton's Gold will carry a recommended retail price of $120 a bottle when it hits U.S. shelves this summer. You'll find my tasting notes for it at whiskycast.com. Angel's Envy Bourbon is expanding distribution outside of the U.S. for the first time. The Bacardi-owned brand is now exporting to the U.K. and will add Canada, Australia, and Singapore this spring. This fall, Angel's Envy will expand to Germany, France, Italy, and Dubai. As of now, only the mainstream port cask-finished expression of Angel's Envy will be exported. Amrut is out with the final release in its Greedy Angels 10-year-old trilogy. It's made with peated barley, finished in Indian Jaggery rum casks, and bottled at 57.1% ABV. Only 450 bottles will be available worldwide. 150 are coming to the U.S. There's no word on pricing. Scotland's Weems Malts is bringing back its Velvet Fig blended malt. The original version was released in 2014. Now there's a new 25-year-old Velvet Fig. It blends 1988 casks of unpeated Bunnahabhain malts from Islay with ex-sherry casks from Speyside and the Highlands. It'll be available in the UK, Europe, and Asia with a recommended retail price of £126. That's around $160 a bottle. Also out of Scotland, it is not like the folks at Brewdog to keep a low profile, but that is sort of what they've been doing since they opened their Lone Wolf distillery near Aberdeen and started making whiskey. Stephen Kersley is Lone Wolf's head distiller. I caught up with him at the World Whiskey Forum in Seattle, and he's already starting to ruffle some feathers within the very traditional Scotch whiskey industry.
So our whiskies currently are between about a year and 18 months old. They have been in our temperature-controlled and humidity-controlled maturation warehouse for about 6 months now in that perfect climate. So we're just monitoring. We haven't got a locked-in date. We're definitely keen to explore work-in-progress releases because we think the signs are really, really positive. We've got some, obviously, that we're drinking tonight, which is a really exciting 1-year-old that has been in an ex-vodka cask. Actually, we put a virgin oak. We filled a virgin oak cask with vodka for 6 months. We took it out and then we put the new make spirit. So it's a Maris Otter base with red wine yeast that's been single pass distilled. Really excited to get the feedback on that. So it's something that we would be keeping a close eye on for release, hopefully sometime in the next year or so.
How much trouble do you expect with the Scotch Whisky Association when the time comes to put this into a bottle? Because the way they say it, the way the law reads, only Scotch whiskey can be made in Scotland.
Yeah, it's an interesting question because what we're not trying to do is be sensational in the sense that we're looking for, drama, or we're trying to sensationalize or catastrophize the category. What we're doing is we're putting liquid at the heart of everything that we do, and in that we're trying to search for new flavour, interesting flavour that's maybe not traditional. What I would say, and a challenge back, would be that we're not here to tear it down. We are here to contribute in a really authentic and engaging way.
One thing I noticed in doing an extensive reading recently of the current Scotch whisky law in the UK is that nowhere in there does it mention traditional practices anymore.
For us, we see that the legislation be quite rigorously upheld. The feedback that I've had on numerous occasions when dealing with the SWA is that they are averse to moving away from tradition. So I'm interested to actually hear that. So on numerous occasions when we've, as an example, there was a conversation that we had recently about a 2-year-old whiskey that they believed that we were going to release, which we weren't. But they gave me a phone and said, "Stephen, we've heard that your plan is to release a 2-year-old whiskey. It's obviously quite contentious if you're going to do that." So, and the phrasing that they use is non-traditional, but it's also explicitly stated in the legislation that it must be 3 years old. So don't worry, we're not going to do that. But for me, the traditional aspect of making whiskey is the part that I really struggle with in terms of the definition. When we're engaging with the SWA, it's a very there's a bit of a grey area for me. So if we were to come to a place where we really kind of define that grey area, so that we knew what the definition of tradition is, I'd be in a better place to know exactly what I can and can't do.
We're not going to see the tactical nuclear penguin equivalent of a Brewdog whiskey, right?
Interestingly, so tactical is made by freeze distillation. So the way that we get to 32% in the bottle is that we take our beer, which we then freeze down to like -20. We decant off the beer after the water's frozen, and we repeat that process to concentrate. But how cool would it be to make a whiskey that has the wash distillation freeze distilled? So we take the wash by freezing the batch of beer, and then taking the liquid that has not frozen, i.e. the higher strength beer, and then capturing that and putting it into the still for a second distillation would be really exciting to see how that influences the final flavour of the new make spirit.
Oh, I can just see this going over really well with the SWA.
Exactly. So, but that isn't specified. You can't do that. But it would be termed non-traditional. So this is the bit that's the dubiety exists, because no one was freezing beer or wash back in the day to then make whiskey. What I'm saying is, in pursuit of flavour, to try and understand how flavour is created, when you heat up something, obviously the complexity of the chemistry in that mixture completely radically changes. But a gentle freezing process where you preserve all those flavours, distilling those will absolutely give you a different flavour profile. It's like vacuum distillation as well. That's non-traditional. But if we were to put a vacuum still in to make Scotch whisky, what would the view be? I talked today about the single pass distilling. I mean, that's non-traditional, but what would their view be? We don't want to get into a position where we're listing all the things you can and can't do, but a little bit more clarity would definitely help. But then I don't think we'd really care anyway if we got that clarity, because we would pursue the flavour regardless.
Well, I know William Grant & Sons has had vacuum stills at Girvan since about 1964, so I'm not sure whether they're using it for malt or for grain, but one could argue 1964 to now would be pretty doggone traditional by this point.
For sure. So you've got a really good example there of using good technology to arguably change the flavour profile of your whiskey. So if we were to do that en masse in our distillery in Ellen, it'd be really interesting to get the viewpoint of the SWA on that. But I mean, for us, as I say, we're not setting out to kind of rock the boat in the sense that we want to be confrontational. That's not what we're saying. What we are saying, though, is we won't compromise on quality and flavour. So if that brings about a dispute, then it should be a really engaging and interesting conversation to have.
If you remember the disputes of the late 2000s between Brooke Laddie and the Scotch Whisky Association, well, get your popcorn ready. This is going to be interesting. Finally, the Aussie Spirit Auction to benefit Rural Aid's wildfire relief programs in Australia was held Friday night in Sydney. They are still counting up all of the proceeds, but organizer David Pierce emailed to let us know the preliminary results. The live auction Friday night and the online auction over the last month or so raised around $80,000 Australian for Rural Aid. We'll have more details next time around. You can keep up on the latest whiskey news all week long at whiskycast.com. The news is brought to you by Heaven Hill Distillery. Larceny Bourbon's heritage goes back to the days when Treasury Agent John E. Fitzgerald was patrolling the rickhouses of Kentucky, not just for the feds, but also for himself. Seems he was stealing a taste out of some of his favorite barrels of wheated bourbon on the side. Today's award-winning Larceny Bourbon has that same soft, smooth character Fitzgerald craved. Look for 92 proof Larceny Bourbon at your local retailer, and be on the lookout for the new limited edition release of Larceny Barrel Proof. You can always find out more at heavenhilldistillery.com. Think wisely, drink wisely. Next time around, I'll be on location again. This time around, it's Dramfest 2020 in Christchurch, New Zealand. It's this coming Saturday and Sunday at Christchurch City Hall, and we'll have highlights from the weekend on WhiskyCast and on our social media feeds. You might want to keep your eyes open because we might just do a live video stream or two from Dramfest on our YouTube channel. We'll keep you posted. Also, there are still a few tickets left for my Dramfest American Whiskey tasting. It's on Friday night at the Carlton Bar and Eatery in Christchurch. There's a link for more details at the WhiskyCast website. Time now for the WhiskyCast calendar of events, and we get to welcome a new sponsor for the calendar this week. Thanks to our friends at Catoctin Creek Distilling in Virginia, Becky and Scott Harris, for coming on board as a brand new sponsor of WhiskyCast. Bonhams has its next whiskey auction on Wednesday in Edinburgh, Scotland, and we should note that Bonhams currently has no whiskey auctions scheduled in Hong Kong as of now, but that was also the case before the coronavirus outbreak began. The Moncton Spirits Festival is this Friday night in Moncton, New Brunswick. The Spirit of Amsterdam International Whiskey Festival is this Saturday and Sunday in the Netherlands. This coming Sunday is International Women's Day, and Republic Restoratives in Washington, D.C. will have a day-long celebration at the distillery. There is also a Women of Australian Distilling luncheon at Bloodwood in Newtown, New South Wales on the 8th as well. The New Orleans Bourbon Festival is March 11th through the 14th. The Taipei Whiskey Club has its St. Patrick's Meetup March 11th in Taipei, Taiwan. Whiskeys of the World Denver and the Detroit Whiskey Festival are both on Friday the 13th. The Trondheim Whiskey Festival is on the 14th in Trondheim, Norway. The Roma Whiskey Festival is on the 14th and 15th in Rome. Whiskey Live Tel Aviv runs from March 18th through the 22nd in Israel. And Whiskey and Barrel Night New York is on March 19th. Right now, we have 253 different events around the world on our calendar of events at whiskycast.com. It's brought to you by Catoctin Creek Distilling, makers of Virginia's most awarded spirits, including the Roundstone Rye and Rabble Rouser Bottled in Bond Rye, and they do it all with renewable solar energy. In fact, you can actually see how their solar array is performing in real time at their website, catoctincreekdistilling.com.
The search never ends, but it's nice when you can come in for a landing, pause and explore the silky smoothness of single pot still Irish whiskey, matured in the finest bourbon and Oloroso sherry casks. Land on Redbreast, then be sure to pass it on. Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast.
Just wanted to share something special from our friends at Redbreast. If you've ever wanted to visit Ireland, well, Redbreast wants to make that happen. They're giving away a 5-day, 4-night trip for two to visit Ireland. All you have to do is visit redbreastwhiskey.com/Ireland, and share your story of landing on Redbreast. The contest runs through March 31st, 2020. Terms and conditions apply. And one of those conditions, unfortunately, it's only open to U.S. residents. Complete rules are available at the Redbreast website. WhiskyCast In Depth is brought to you by Mortlock. There really are very few places where it's not practical to make whiskey. If you can grow grain someplace, well, you can probably make whiskey from it. Take Iceland, for instance. It's become a popular place for tourists thanks to cheap airfares, and local beers have been part of the Icelandic culture for many years. Now there's even a whiskey distillery. Eimverk Distillery is on the outskirts of Reykjavik, and the family-owned distillery makes Floki single malts, along with several styles of gin and aquavit. Now, I'd heard about the sheep dung smoked version of Floki a while back, and had made a note to follow up on Eimverk at some point. But fate intervened, as it always seems to do. Eva Maria Silversborn's daughter is Eimverk's production manager, which means that she does everything from distilling to leading tours to handling all the personnel paperwork. And we were both in Seattle last week for the World Whiskey Forum.
How did you get roped into working with your cousins to start a distillery?
Well, I was out of job, and they needed help. They couldn't figure out why their fermentation was stopping, and they hadn't set up the distillery. They were still on, experimental state, and I have a background in fish factory, so I know how to produce, and then I'm a biologist, and so science and production was on my side, and then they were good on the marketing and development side. So combining this fits really well together.
Why did your family decide to get into distilling in Iceland to begin with?
So we like to camp together, and we were quite drunk in a camp looking at a barley field, swaying, drinking whiskey, and just why can't we make whiskey out of Icelandic barley? It was a good idea when you are have nothing left in a bottle, but then we needed to figure out why and how we could do it. And we only use Icelandic barley, and sometimes it's marvelous, gives us great yields, everything fantastic. Some years we get frost, we lose fields, we don't get as good, but we figure out a way to work with Icelandic barley, and we are really happy with our product.
I think a lot of people don't even realize that barley is grown in Iceland.
No, we are on the north border on where you can grow barley. But there has been done for the past 35 years extensive research on which varieties do fit Icelandic soil and Icelandic weather conditions. So we do have a really good database and science how we can grow the barley, and that is where we actually take the knowledge from. And then we just are trying to get more money for the barley to sustain the farms. And so that the farm can sustain themselves, it has to get the right price for the barley. And having it as cattle feed, it's cheaper to import barley from China or wherever than actually growing it now in Iceland. But also, then you're going to add to the carbon footprint, and we want to try to do better for the nature. So you have to think more local, and we wanted to figure out how can we make a farm sustainable. My uncle and my father, it's their biggest dream in the world to be farmers. And I can remember the fight at my house when I was 10, when my dad wanted to move to a farm and my mom went crazy. And now you see those two guys at the farm every weekend, every single day they have off, they go to the farm and they are loving it. It's just their dream of being the farmers, and now they are finally being the farmers they've always wanted to be.
So you're growing your own barley then for the distillery?
Yes, we do. And yeah.
It's tough though, right?
Well, it depends on the summer. So 2019 was marvelous. We got about 125 tons. Same fields the year before, 45 tons. Some summers are good, some are bad. Sometimes it starts really well, then you get frost, everything stops, and we live in a tough land, but we have just found a way to work around it and work with what we get at each time. And we just tweak the stills, we tweak the process in the distillery depending on the grain we have from each year.
Now, where did the name Floki come from?
So Floki is actually Hrafna Floki or Raven Floki. He is one of the settlers in Iceland that came to Iceland. He actually gave Iceland its name. He then gave up and moved back to Norway. But our logo has the 3 ravens on him because he used 3 ravens to navigate. We have the Nordic compass, and that is to help you out find your way in life. And we definitely found the way in life by finding our way into whiskey. And then we have an old saying in rounds, the road from home leads to home, meaning it's not the destination, it's a journey you're going to take in life that is kind of, you should focus on the journey, not the destination.
Now, I have to ask this question. Whose idea was it to do the sheep dung smoked whiskey? I know of only 2 distilleries that do it, yours and Belgrove down in Australia, in Tasmania. Peter Bignell does some sheep dung smoked stuff down there, too.
Yeah, that's really cool because now you can do like a world tour of sheep dung whiskies. Iceland, Australia, it's the coolest in the world. I've only met one person that has done that, but there was a guy who came to our distillery that did that. Using sheep dung is Icelandic tradition to smoke. This is the only fuel we had for years, for centuries. Sheep dung was the only fuel available to us. We smoke still today fish and meat. And one of our focuses has always been on, we want to do something that everyone knows, like whiskey or gin, but we want to put the Icelandic twist to it. What can we do in Iceland? What could we have done in Iceland? So as soon as we were asked, are you going to do peated version? Peat in Iceland, we are about 6 degrees colder than Scotland. It doesn't rejuvenate. We had problems with that earlier when people were using peat as fuel, and we have the data about it, how hard it was. So, but the sheep dung always works, and it's easy to get it. We have enough of sheep, and we just have to dry it outside for about 2 years, and you have to have a certain type of house for the sheep, but it's always there. It's never going to go away. And it's the Icelandic way of doing it. So, of course, sheep dung is what we're going to use if we're going to smoke anything.
It is a renewable energy source.
Definitely renewable energy. Definitely. And we need to keep the sheep inside about 8 months a year. So we are never going to run out of that shit.
Literally.
Literally never running out.
I know that Iceland has been hit with an influx of tourism in the last few years, thanks to Icelandair and some of those folks. Have you seen a big number of tourists coming to the distillery or surprised when they see that Iceland has a whiskey distillery?
So the tourism is changing a lot, and most people in the travel industry last year saw a decrease while we saw an increase at our visiting center. So people are more and more traveling just to meet people that live in Iceland. You are going for the cuisine, you're going for the food, for the beer, and of course the whiskey as well. So yes, we do see the increase with us. We have tours every day now, and they are even moving it up right now up to 2 tours a day. We are bounded by the health regulation in Iceland, and we actually had to make a deal with them because since we're a food factory, you are not allowed to allow anyone into a food factory that is not a member of staff. But by doing it after 4 o'clock, then we are allowed to do it. So we kind of made a deal with them that we wouldn't allow people into the distillery before 4 o'clock. But it also put a pressure on the staff in the distillery that everything has to be done by 4. But it also means that everyone goes out at 4, means people live better family lives. The ones that are working in the distillery, it's healthier for the family that everyone is just off at 4. And it has benefits, and so it's a good thing in a way that we are pressured to finish everything before when you're working in the distillery. But it's really good to be able to allow people then to come into the distillery after the workday is done. And now we're going up to having 2 tours a day.
And during the summer, the sun doesn't set until very late at night, so you can still do daylight tours and people are out running around.
The sun doesn't set in Iceland in the summer. We have 24 hours of daylight from around middle of May until end of July. So, yeah, it's awesome. But, yeah, it's the best time in the year in Iceland.
Now, having lived in Alaska, I'm very used to the sun being up at midnight or whatever, but the balance of life is great because you can work till 4 o'clock and then if there is a golf course, you can go play golf after you get off work.
Well, you just have to control your time. And, well, it's easier if you have kids like me. Then you're kind of set by the routine of the children. But, of course, people will stay up longer in the summer and then sleep more in the winter. But you get it in this time of the year in February, the day is getting longer by 8 minutes. And you can feel every cell of your body is going like, it's bright, it's coming bright. In July, you go like, when is it getting dark again? I need more sleep. And you're longing for the darkness. So you go in this kind of yearly routine where you can feel how you are missing the brightness, and then you feel how you miss the darkness. But you have Christmas, and we go crazy with Christmas lights, so you get the brightness. Also, you have the snow a lot of the time, so then it isn't as dark. Yeah, but it's just how it is.
I know in the summertime in Alaska, we used to put aluminum foil in the windows to block the sun at night so that you could actually get some sleep at night.
Some people do that, of course. Some people sleep with stuff over their eyes. I do that. But I didn't need to do it when I was younger. And my kids, it doesn't bother my kids at all. It starts bothering me now as I'm growing older, but I'm not too worried about it. You can get you fix it just because it's worth it to see the sun not setting.
Where are you selling your whiskeys outside of Iceland, or are you yet? Or do you make enough to be able to sell them outside?
So Iceland is a really, really small market. So our main focus was always we're going to export. So our biggest market right now is in Germany. But we also sell to France and Italy, Taiwan, Japan, and we're going into the Chinese market as well. We have actually 2 stores down in Australia that buy from us. And we're working on the FDA approval for most of our single malts. Not the birch finish, due to that FDA believes birch is really dangerous when it comes in touch with alcohol.
They're wrong.
Yeah, I agree with that. But I don't make up the rules in the U.S., so I just try to follow them.
Do we get the sheep dung smoked version?
Yes, you're going to get the sheep dung version.
Any idea when?
So we have the labels went in, 10 days ago, so hopefully it's going to be done in the next 2 weeks.
Oh, you're so optimistic about our government.
It's the only thing I can do. It's getting bright again, so we're always more optimistic at that time. So hopefully before summer we're going to be able to ship stuff to U.S.
What is the biggest misconception about Iceland that people have when they get there for the first time?
That you know how to drive. Trust me, we have narrow roads, we have gravel on the sides, we have, in the summer, running sheep around everywhere. Or we have frost, and we have snow, and we have wind, and it's going to affect your ability to drive on the road. So I think that is the biggest thing, that people believe they can drive in every situation, and then you hit Iceland, just like, nope, you are not trained for this. So we are having problems with tourists getting into bad accidents on the roads. We are trying to figure out a way to fix that. It's going slowly. But I think the biggest conception is that we're many, we're big, but we're really few. So, yeah.
And, of course, people confusing Iceland and Greenland is covered with ice and Iceland is not.
Oh, yeah. This is just the first advertisement trick ever. So, Eiríkur Rauði settled Greenland. He came from Iceland and settled Greenland. And he wanted people to come and settle Greenland with him, not thinking that you had a population of Inuits living in Greenland at the time, but still, of course, he settled the country. So he named it Greenland to try to lure people to move there. I think they lived... There was a population there of Icelandic origin for 150 years, and then they disappeared completely. But we don't know how. It's believed that just flu, stuff like that. And Greenland is really tough to have horticulture on. You have to live like the Inuits does if you want to survive there. And they didn't. They wanted to live like they did in Iceland or in Norway.
And that doesn't work ever.
No, if you move, you have to adapt to the environment you're moving into or the society you move into. You can't just keep your ways because you don't have the Gulf Stream around like we do in Iceland, so you have a colder temperature. You have less soil on top, so horticulture is much, much harder. And I actually don't think they have so much horticulture in Greenland. But it's a beautiful country, and I love to go there one day. It's definitely on the bucket list to go and see it. It's a beautiful country.
During the warm part of the year?
No, I rather want to go when it's a little more cold because they have huge mosquitoes, and I hate those.
Sounds a lot like Alaska in the summertime.
Yeah, I actually think Greenland is much closer to Alaska in that sense. For some reason, mosquitoes have not been able to get... They are not existent in Iceland. So, thankfully, we don't have any mosquitoes. So, yeah.
The Tourist Board of Iceland will be glad to hear that you say that. Great selling point. Come to Iceland. No mosquitoes.
Of course. That's the best ever. It's too windy. They cannot fly there.
At last check, the TTB still had not yet approved the labels for the various floki expressions. We'll keep you posted as more details become available, and we are also trying to get some clarification on that issue the government has with birch casks. That's Whiskey Cast in Depth. It's brought to you by Mortlach, whiskey's best-kept secret. Hidden away for decades in some of the world's most famous Scotch whiskies, comes a single malt inspired by an original for a fortunate few. Discover the entire Mortlach lineup at malts.com. The What I'm Tasting This Week department is brought to you by Sagamore Spirit. Let's start off with two of the Floki single malts from Imverk Distillery. Eva Maria brought a bottle of the birch cask finish with her to Seattle. It's bottled at 47% ABV, and the nose is crisp and sweet. It reminds me a lot of birch wood smoke, along with touches of tangy barbecue sauce, dried flowers, and a hint of heather. The taste has an excellent balance of white pepper, cardamom, and a hint of cinnamon that complement background notes of honey, anise, and just a hint of licorice. The finish is very long and aromatic with dried fruits and just a touch of lingering spices. I'm scoring the Floki Birch Cask Finish Single Malt a 91. Now, let's get to the one you've been waiting for, the Floki Sheep Dung Smoked Reserve Single Malt. It's also bottled at 47% ABV, and the nose has notes of freshly cut alfalfa and clover, along with lime, mezcal, tequila, and dried flowers. The taste is tart, tangy, and light with a touch of white pepper and lime, lemon zest, dried flowers, and a hint of butterscotch. The finish, long and tart with just a hint of spice. It doesn't stink at all. In fact, I'm scoring the Floki Sheep Dung Smoked Icelandic Single Malt a 92. I'll have more tasting notes in just a minute, but first, this week's tasting notes are brought to you by Sagamore Spirit Rye Whiskey. Rye whiskey was distilled by America's original risk-takers and history makers. Those first barrels of whiskey were bold, flavorful, and full of passion. Sagamore Spirit proudly picked up the torch with their spring-fed Maryland-style rye whiskey. It celebrates the grit and glory of those patriotic ancestors who sipped their way into American history. Visit SagamoreSpirit.com to explore their award-winning spirit. Had the chance to taste one of these so-called world whiskeys the other day. One thing Japanese whiskey blenders have been doing to work through the shortage of aged Japanese whiskeys is to create blends using whiskeys from more than one country, such as the Suntory AO World Whiskey created last year by Suntory's Shinji Fukuyo, using Beam Suntory whiskeys from Japan, Scotland, Ireland, Canada, and the U.S. Well, the Yamazakura 963 18-year-old single Mizunara cask comes from Sasanokawa Shuzo and uses a similar concept. It's a blend of world malt whiskeys finished in a Japanese Mizunara oak cask, and it's bottled at 53% ABV. The nose has notes of sandalwood, almond oil, incense, and manuka honey. The taste has an excellent and complex balance of white pepper and clove spices, along with incense, marzipan, honey, and a hint of vanilla underneath. The finish is long and astringent with a lingering touch of white pepper and a hint of dried flowers that comes out as the spice fades away. Thanks to Decanta for providing me with a sample, I'm scoring the Yamazakura 963 Single Mizunara cask a 94. Sweden's Box Distillery is now known as High Coast following a name change last year, and bottled one of its single casks for the annual Cinderella Whiskey Cruise a few weeks ago. If you're not familiar with that cruise, it's a way to get around Sweden's government-owned liquor monopoly by taking a cruise ship out of Stockholm into international waters for a floating duty-free whiskey festival that usually ends with people pushing shopping carts full of booze when they return to port. Well, High Coast's small batch number 13 was distilled from unpeated barley back in 2012, matured in American oak, and bottled back in January at cask strength, 56% ABV. The nose is aromatic with toasted oak, butterscotch, honey, anise, and soft spices. The taste is sharp and spicy with black pepper and cinnamon notes that fade slowly to reveal hints of fresh berries, honey, and vanilla in the background. Now, if you add a few drops of water, it makes the palate creamier, mutes the spices, and accentuates the vanilla. The finish is long and sharp without the water, and slightly tart, but when you add water, it smooths out the finish as well. I'm scoring the High Coast Small Batch number 13 a 92. The What I'm Tasting This Week department is brought to you by Sagamore Spirit Rye Whiskey. I'm adding these tasting notes to our searchable list of more than 2,800 different whiskeys from all over the world. Check it out this week at whiskycast.com.
From deep in the north, far beyond the wall, the howl of the frozen wind brings word of something new. A whiskey from the land of always winter, for those who face the oncoming storm and never stop walking. Winter is here. White Walker by Johnny Walker.
White Walker by Johnny Walker. Blended Scotch whiskey, 41.7% alcohol by volume. Imported by Diageo North America, Norwalk, Connecticut. Please drink responsibly.
It's time to announce our Whiskey Club of the Month for March. This month we're honoring the Whisky Club Mexico. It's based in Mexico City, but has 176 members around the country. Victor Poplowski emailed us to nominate his club. He says, "We are trying to promote whiskey culture in our city and our country, and I personally believe we're on the right track. Over time, it has become easier to find more interesting whiskeys in Mexico and more people interested in them." Thanks, Victor. We'll be sending you 24 Whiskey Cast Glencairn glasses to use at your club tastings. If you have a whiskey club and you'd like to be considered for our next club of the month, it's easy. All you have to do is use the contact form at whiskycast.com to get in touch with us and tell us a bit about your club. If you have a website or are present on social media, we'll be glad to add a link on the Whiskey Clubs page at the WhiskyCast website to help other whiskey lovers find you. Once again, congratulations to the Whisky Club Mexico, our Whiskey Club of the Month, and thanks to Glencairn Crystal for helping us to support whiskey clubs around the world. Let's open up the inbox now for Your Voice, presented by Lot 40. After our interview a couple of weeks ago with Dewar's Malt's brand ambassador and breast cancer survivor Una Green, we heard from her colleagues. They're working on a series of Welcome Back Una tastings March 11th in several U.S. cities, with the proceeds to benefit breast cancer charities. We'll post the details in our calendar section at the WhiskyCast website. I had some fun on social media teasing our segment on Imverk Distillery and that sheep dung smoked whiskey this past week. One of those posts used a GIF from the Shaun the Sheep kids TV show, along with the line, "You're not going to believe what they burn in their malting kiln." Tim Ushaw posted this on Facebook, and I'm quoting now, that sheep is just there because it's cute, right? Nothing to do with the smoking process, right? And Kelly, at Whiskied Wander on Twitter, added this, if it's those adorable sheep, I'm going to be mad. Relax, gang. No sheep were harmed in the making of Floki Sheep Dung Smoked Reserve Whiskey. At Tash McGill tweeted from New Zealand, I can't wait to listen. Particularly pertinent because we're working on a new smoking technique for a new whiskey collaboration. Tash, I hope you learned something from the interview, and I hope to see you this week in Christchurch. On Instagram, Alistair Higgins asked, does it taste like shit? I've tried it, and it kind of does, but in a good way, if that makes any sense. And on a related note, at Bugs Whiskey with a Z, tweeted, I have 2 bottles here on the shelf now. Can't wait to hear your tasting notes. I love the Barnyard Funk. Well, you heard my tasting notes a minute ago. I did not get a Barnyard Funk. I didn't even get an Uptown Funk. Sorry, couldn't resist. If there's anything you'd like to share with whiskey lovers around the world, you can always find us on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter at WhiskeyCast, or you can just email us. The address is comments@whiskycast.com. Your voice is presented by Lot 40, Canada's 100% pot still rye whiskey. Lot 40, unapologetically Canadian. Please drink responsibly. Let's wrap things up now with Behind the Label, our look at the history, science, and other things that all make whiskey unique. It's brought to you by Writer's Tears. If you've ever walked into a whiskey warehouse, you may have noticed a lot of rusty barrel hoops and wondered just how they got that way, especially since alcohol is supposed to be astringent. Well, the thing is, those hoops are made out of plain old sheet metal, and just as with any unpainted metal, they will corrode over time. But some warehouses are more prone to rust than others, and the more corrosion that builds up on a hoop, the weaker its structural integrity. It's the same thing for the metal bolts that hold wooden ricks together, along with the conduits for electrical wire and pipes for sprinkler systems. And that's why distillers would like to know why some warehouses get more rust than others. During this week's Beam Institute conference at the University of Kentucky, UK engineering professor Stephen Shafrick explained the results of a study he and his students did for Beam Suntory. They looked at some of the massive warehouses being built now in Kentucky, and as you might expect, they found a lot of ethyl alcohol vapor in the air, along with acetic acid, and something else present in high amounts in Kentucky: humidity.
So that's no big deal if that stuff's sitting there in the air. In fact, we've been in several warehouses that don't have this gross rust problem where there's way high ethyl alcohol vapor in the air, so high you can taste it. And they're not having that problem. But what they also have is they have a different kind of seal on those. Those are sealed buildings. These buildings are open. So if the temperature is not changing inside at the same speed as it's changing by the weather, and my humidity's going all over the place, which it is, I'm going to get condensation. Ethyl alcohol vapor likes to dissolve in water. Acetic acid vapor likes to dissolve in water. So during those condensation events, I get water droplets that goes down onto my barrels, and that is putting 2 very corrosive acids directly onto my barrels. Or their barrels. Yeah. I just came back from a mining conference. I flew in from Phoenix last night, and I told everybody I was talking at a bourbon conference. We're trying to reduce the loss of the barrels by doing some what to the mining guys is pretty simple stuff, and we everybody concluded I'm doing God's work. So I started calling it calling it my barrels. So sorry, I'm taking a little bit of ownership.
Their research is focusing on ways to not only monitor conditions inside rickhouses to see when condensation is likely, but also on ways to remove that volatile air from rickhouses without changing the airflow that affects maturation. Now, you heard Professor Shafrick talk about that mining conference. That's his real specialty, not whiskey warehouses. He's used to working on airflow systems in underground coal mines and sees a lot of similarities between the two, right down to the highly explosive environments in each one. If you have something you'd like us to look at on an upcoming episode, just use the contact form at whiskycast.com to get in touch with us. Behind the Label is brought to you by Writer's Tears.
Writer's Tears Copper Pot, a unique triple distilled premium Irish whiskey, combining single malt and single pot still. First fashioned in the 1700s and still a rarity today. Sure, as we say in Ireland, what's rare is wonderful. Writer's Tears Copper Pot.
That's all for this edition of Whisky Cast. You'll find links for the stories in this episode in our show notes at whiskycast.com. That's also where you'll find links for our Whisky Cast HD videos and the Whisky Cast Tasting Panel podcast, the latest whiskey news, my tasting notes, the whiskey photo of the week, the calendar of events, and of course a complete archive of all of our past episodes that goes all the way back to 2005. You can always get in touch with us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at WhiskyCast. We love to hear from you. The email address is comments@whiskycast.com.
When you land on something special, you just know. Redbreast, the quintessential single pot still Irish whiskey, and a proud sponsor of WhiskyCast.
From far beyond the wall comes a whiskey for those who face the oncoming storm and never stop walking. Winter is here. White Walker by Johnny Walker.
White Walker by Johnny Walker. Blended Scotch whiskey, 41.7% alcohol by volume. Imported by Diageo North America, Norwalk, Connecticut. Please drink responsibly.
Whiskey Cast is a production of Cask Strength Media, copyright 2020, and comes to you from the charming, yet regrettably dry town of Haddonfield, New Jersey. I'm Mark Gillespie, reminding you that when you drink, please drink responsibly. Thanks for listening.